Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is a steaming pile of garbage. I would go as far as to label it the equivalent of an old baby diaper filled with expired Indian food festering in some Qatari desert. In fact, series creator Brian Lee O'Malley really should have sought the assistance of Canada's maid services instead of giving this absolutely useless, undesirable reimagining any time of day. When this series was announced, a lot of us were rightfully excited. 2010's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World became a cult hit despite the film struggling to make its budget back at the box office. During the virus that shall not be named, a reading of the film by the original cast was posted online, and not long after, the animated Netflix series was announced. Of course, the collective fan base, myself included, went from 6 to midnight upon hearing this news.
Great.
With a towel down and pants out of sight, I was ready to stroke it to a banger adaptation that would hopefully explore more of the ideas the movie skipped over. Unfortunately, I was left blue-balled because despite a pretty rushed but faithful opening episode, Scott Pilgrim is killed off during his fight with Matthew Patel at the end of it, and it becomes the Ramona Flowers show.
You gotta be kidding me. What? You gotta be kidding me!
The following episode starts off with Scott's funeral, and instead of using this plot twist to introduce a heartfelt interlude where our secondary and tertiary characters revisit the good times with Scott, Envy Adams shows up and promptly turns this funeral into a pop concert with everyone basically dancing on Scott's grave. Post-funeral, Ramona thinks she hears Scott in the subspace highway and begins to believe he's alive and has been kidnapped by one of her evil exes. And that, my dear, is what sets off this absolute fucking abomination of a reimagining. But why, oh why would they reimagine such a beautiful and well-told story?
Women, because women are the main gender.
Much like many other reimaginings post-2015, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is a pretty systematic emasculation and destruction of anything remotely masculine. Scott Pilgrim has been labeled by many, including the series creator, as a toxic male, which quite frankly shits on everything that made the series and film memorable. Is Scott Pilgrim a perfect dude? No. He's a bit of a bitch, a massive loser, selfish, and Canadian to top it off. Was Ramona any better? No. However, the point of these protagonists was not to love them, but to follow them through their journey of self-actualization and emotional growth. Scott Pilgrim is overwhelmingly insecure. It's why he crumbles at the mention of his famous ex, Envy Adams, and why despite an overflow of unreasonable affection, he falls for Ramona, though each of her exes represents different insecurities. No deep connections, masculinity, inane perfection, female perspectives, cheating and manipulation, and finally, power. It's this underlying messaging that makes the IP so enjoyable to so many fans, because there's a semblance of relatability throughout the tale, even if you find Scott to be a pussy or Ramona a selfish slag. The twist of dressing it up with video game-inspired tunes, effects, and anime-styled fights takes all of this to a fun, quirky, and outright outrageous comedic height that very few creations have managed to successfully do, both in film and literature. This reimagining with Ramona Flowers at the forefront is written by none other than the series creator, who decided to deep-throat a barrel of Trudeau's jizz and spew it out onto paper, in hopes that the overwhelming progressivism of his new story would be enough to create some semblance of an idea.
Shut the fuck up! Know your fucking place, trash!
And as many people have noticed, yes, this is a He-Man level bait and switch.
Very vocal contingency of the internet is going to say I'm lying or something
Apologize!
like that.
Atone!
That I'm baiting and switching or something like that. I can kind of get when people are like, oh, I wanted like more He-Man in this show and whatnot.
Netflix knew exactly what they were doing as they baited the hell out of you in the first episode and plastered Scotty Boy's face on every piece of promotional material out there. What's more is I can't even tell which is worse. Kevin Smith with a freshly implanted vagina or discount gender studies barista Brian Lee O'Malley. In order to bring all the exes to the forefront since, there isn't a new boyfriend to fight anymore, young Neil is now a young cinephile who writes a screenplay about Scott's life. Yeah, I know, that guy that no one gave a shit about earlier when they were jamming to Envy Adams on top of his coffin. In an attempt at humor, the script young Neil has written is the original plot we've all come to know, where it's Scott fighting the exes. And this reimagining within a reimagining, I know, meta, right? Attracts all of the evil exes to the movie set in one way or another because O'Malley can't seem to find any fun, innovative way to bring all these characters together otherwise. As each episode progresses, it becomes painfully obvious that nobody in the writer's room knows what they're doing. Where there was an opportunity for Ramona to overcome the hurdles that shackled her from having a relationship with Scott is instead some haphazard series strung together by sticky note ideas, where every character is emasculated, save for the flaming gay guy and the brown dude. Can you guess why?
Shalom. I'd like to apply for a loan.
There's many instances where this focus on Ramona could have worked, but no one wants to put in the effort to actually make it work. The film set being used to get the exes together is lazy, but I suppose it works, and would have acted as a more relatable medium for Ramona to confront her exes, while each is dressed as the man she seeks to romance next. Instead, she breaks every single one of them down and uses that emasculation to become the Thanos of emotional superiority.
He used the stones to destroy the stones.
How, you ask? Well, aside from Gideon getting defeated at the hands of Patel and turning into Gordon from North Bay, a real character biography factoid that instead comes across as Beta, Lucas Lee has his empire shattered by Ramona and his supposedly toxic, cancelable traits, and becomes weeb besties with Gideon. Wallace spends an entire episode butt-fucking Todd Ingram into sexual confusion, and the Katiyanagi twins remain basically untouched because Brian Lee O'Malley realized he could only create so many pointless filler episodes before he needed to get back to an actual plot. But don't worry, they have an explicitly gendered robot that hops around in every episode for reasons? To be fair, I could have gotten on the Wallace Wells Todd Ingram ship if it weren't for the pattern I had identified. Ramona's 5 episodes of Sherlocking to find disappeared Scott ends up going nowhere by the end of episode 6 because time travel aficionado Scott returns and uses the whole next episode to flash us back to the day he died, where he was actually taken by an even bigger cuck, his future self, set on keeping young Scott away from Ramona because they go through a divorce 14 years later.
Time travel!
It's not even fucking clever when legitimately every Marvel product devolves into this piss-poor excuse for writing. For only 8 30-minute episodes, this show drags on. The pacing is an absolute mess, with the first episode rushing to the point, then the next 5 episodes not only going nowhere, but failing to execute any meaningful arcs, just a bunch of humor that misses more than it lands. Humor that does nothing but attempt to mimic the 2010 film, by the way, and latches onto it like clap to a dollar whore.
It's like Churchill says, son, why stand when you can sit? On a prostitute's face.
Whatever do I mean? Recall the vegan powers joke from the first film?
The deveganizing ready.
Hit him.
O'Malley saw an opportunity because as soon as Todd Ingram is introduced, you have non-stop vegan jokes for half the series. If we look at how Gideon goes from being a power-hungry narcissist to a couch-dwelling loser, they attempt to make his downfall humorous by having him become a lazy weeb, which I guess explains why the anal swabs of the internet seem to love this series so much. Relatable for y'all, huh? Majority of the humor otherwise falls flat in its attempt to mimic or be meta, which is a stylistic element I hope dies out soon, because only Community managed to do it well.
Oh, your nose is bleeding!
Abed, stop
being meta.
The characters outside of the men are pretty horrendously reimagined as well. Knives Chow unexpectedly becomes a base goddess during a jam session with Kim just hours after Scott's funeral, with a giant heart forming between the two. And then this revelation is like never visited again. I thought nothing of it until the first ex-Ramona battles, which is Roxy, the lesbian, is defeated and begins making out with Kim to see if they have the sparks.
But why?
Wallace doesn't just comedically turn characters gay anymore. Nah, he straight up fucking annihilates any semblance of self they have as the moment he starts fucking Todd. Todd doesn't know who he is anymore and is reduced down to not vegan jokes for the rest of the series. Steven still pops up when someone needs to have filler dialogue, much like Knives. Julie is now evil and in love with Gideon, by the way, which is a wholly unclear side story on its own, because she emotionally beats down Gideon, then slurps his tongue the next moment. And not in the sexy, degrading way I know some of y'all masochists like.
I like it. Ow. Wolfie, 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 Wolfie.
All these character reinventions leave us with nothing meaningful. No depth, no nuance, no new avenues that open these characters up. All you need to know is that vagina equals power. Plot and character assassinations aside, for a show centered around Ramona Flowers, Mary Elizabeth Winstead seems to have missed the cue that she actually needs to give a fuck. She has the most screen time of any character, and it sounds like she wishes she could be anywhere else but the recording room compared to her co-stars Chris Evans, Ellen Wong, and Brandon Routh, who bring the energy to every scene they're in. It made me question, yet again, why dudes stand for this chick so hard when on top of being a mid-actress, she's also a homewrecker. There are very few things Scott Pilgrim Takes Off gets right. The animation is charming and similar to the novels, however, even that seems choppy and varies from episode to episode when it comes to specific scenes that involve maybe a little bit more action. The music, led by Anna Managuchi, is pretty awesome, even if it should have had more of a spotlight than it did. Attempting to bring more romance into Scott and Ramona's relationship is also appreciated. The novels did a pretty good job of establishing a baseline attraction, and the movie seems to forego quite a bit of that to create a more fluid storyline. So to see these characters play out a star-crossed lovers plotline is a nice contrast to the coldness Ramona had throughout the film due to Gideon's chip implant. I think that's really all the good there is, because Brian Lee O'Malley genuinely seems not to know what he's doing with his own reimagining, as not-so-subtle feminist rewriting takes the forefront instead of interesting plot and characters. It's as though a fanfiction.net writer known for gender-bending characters took over and thought that they could undo all of Scott's supposed toxicity by instilling it in every female character instead, because
of the pussy. Excuse me?
To the diehard fans of Scott Pilgrim, don't watch this. I finally understand how Star Wars fans feel, watching something they adore be so carelessly taken apart for modernization. And if you do end up enjoying this, well, I'm sorry to say that you're part of the problem when it comes to the West failing to create compelling, fresh stories. And you're likely in need of some desperate therapy or a testosterone boost, just judging by the amount of pronoun that flooded my Twitter inbox over the weekend. Anyways, that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by and stay frosty, friends.